am Sarah Ruffi, the Woman Warrior Lawyer, and today it is my pleasure to introduce Trey Turner. Trey, briefly introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Sarah. My name's Trey. I'm a member of an acoustic pop singer-songwriter duo called the Icarus Account that I have with my twin brother, Ty. We've been a band making music full-time for a little over a decade now, and um, that's been a really fun journey and an interesting way to become an adult by traveling around the country, sleeping on people's couches and whatever else that entails. On top of that, I have a lovely wife named Kelsey. We've been married for also about 10 years, and we've got a couple kiddos as well. And I'm sure I'll talk more about that as we get into this.
I'm sure we will. So, did you always know that you wanted to be a musician?
So that's interesting. Like, yes and no. I think my twin brother, Ty, I have to owe a lot of that towards, because he was definitely from early on, like even middle school, I think kind of knew that he wanted to play music forever and didn't want to ever have a real job. And I was a little more of I was a little more nerdy, I guess, growing up. I did well in school, so I always kind of wanted to play music, but assumed that I would end up with a real job at some point. And even went to college initially to either go into engineering or medicine was kind of what I was thinking. You know, I was a chem major initially, and then about a year and a half into college, switched to be a music major, and then that was the beginning of the end, where once I was majoring in music, it was like, I'm not going to make any money anyway, so I might as well just go full all into music, so
So, as twins, were you guys always kind of joined at the hip, that it was just a natural progression to become a duo in the music world?
a little bit of both. We're fraternal, and while we're very close, we also definitely had individual lives and even went to different schools for high school, which was kind of fun because I was definitely the more introverted twin, and that really allowed me to kind of break out a little bit and kind of have my own friends and social setting and all that kind of stuff. But we were always, like I said, we were always really close. We always played music together. We started playing music in well, we started way back when playing violin and piano when we were little kids, but then we played a lot together in middle school when we started playing guitar, and played in the church band together all through high school and stuff. So we were kind of like separate, but then had a lot of the same stuff going on at the same time. And then as we got older, late high school, early college, we realized how hard it was to keep a band together and have other people that we had to depend on to practice, and realized that the two of us would always be ready to jam out. And so yeah, I think we quickly cut everybody else out of the equation, but we always kind of kept the two of us in there, and we've somehow made that work now throughout a lot of life changes, between me getting married, him getting married, us living in separate states at one point. Now we live about 2.5, 3 hours apart. I've got kids, he doesn't have kids. So there's definitely been some differences, but we always just had a natural on stage chemistry, and just loved working together musically. So I don't think there was ever too much question that we would not be making music together, but um I don't know that, we definitely, there were other people involved at one point, and then we cut them out, and it was just the two of us, so we stuck together.
So, what was the highest number of members you had in a band?
Um, Officially only 3 ever. It was just me and my brother Ty, and then we had a drummer. But throughout the course of a few different attempted jamming sessions and stuff, I mean, we would have, we had a keyboard player in there, and um an extra bass player, and then Ty would play guitar instead of bass, and we kind of move things around. So we've done stuff with as many as like 5 or 6 members, but as an official band, we only ever had us and one other person.
So, what were, for any aspiring musicians, including my son who hooked us up,
Yes.
what were some of the biggest challenges or the biggest learning experiences you had while you were trying to put a band together, and you had people coming and going, and realizing that it was you and Ty that were the constants.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it depends a little bit on where you're at in the process and in the development. Um, and so at the beginning, for us was in high school, it was more of just, hey, do we have somebody who either has a car or has a parent that's willing to drive them to, to practice with us, you know? And then as you get a little bit older and it starts to be more career oriented, there's a lot more complicated questions like, are we making enough money for everybody to be in the band? Does this person need to get paid? Do I need to get paid? Are we all working extra jobs? How is that all working out? Um, and then from the actual band decision making process to there's, is this a good fit musically? Are we all on the same page with what musical direction we're going in? How many shows we want to play? What type of shows we want to play? Are we willing to travel for shows? How much do we need to get paid to be willing to travel for shows? All that kind of stuff. So um, there's a lot of decision making that goes into it. I think the hardest part, I definitely, to me, it felt like in high school it was very hard to be like, oh, does this kid have a car to drive to practice with us? Like that felt like a difficult thing. That was not. It was way harder when we're 21-year-old college dropouts being like, hey, are we gonna be able to pay rent next month? Like, is that it's like, is this a good idea? They're like, are we gonna have gas money to get to the next show? And we just booked an entire, nationwide tour, and like, we don't know if we're gonna be able to pay to get to the next place. So those decisions are a little more serious, I think.
It's all perspective, right?
Right, exactly.
So where did you guys grow up?
Florida. We grew up in Fort Myers, Florida, and currently we both live in Florida now. I live in Melbourne on the east coast of Florida, and then he lives over in Sarasota, about an hour ish north of Fort Myers. So we bounced around a bit here and there in between, but both ended up back in Florida.
Okay. Now, you don't really get a whole lot farther on the spectrum than engineering or medicine and music. How did you make the ultimate decision that I'm just going for the starving artist from the promise of a big paycheck?
Right. Yeah. I think I have to give Ty a lot of credit for that, or maybe blame is a better word. But he just
Perspective
had such a
again.
drive and a passion to pursue music as a career. And I always loved music. And I think I was maybe afraid to let myself dream sometimes growing up. And so, I went to college because that's just what you're supposed to do after high school,
Yep.
and I think that throughout college, I transitioned a little bit more from, oh, music is just this hobby that was fun, that was a dream that's never going to happen, to, oh man, maybe this is a possibility. And one thing that really helped me was that I started taking some music classes um, at school with the intention of minoring in music. And then the more that I got into the music program at school, I went to a small school called Stetson University. And one of the reasons I went there was because they had a good music school, but they also had, some of the other stuff, but I wasn't locked into a program from the start. Whereas, as you probably know, with having kids that are around college age, a lot of places, especially in the competitive schools, they kind of want you to know from day one exactly what you're doing. And I was accepted into like the University of Miami's engineering program. And I remember visiting there and I'd asked them about, potentially minoring in music or doing some of that stuff. And I remember the director of their program being like, well, you won't have time to do that. You're just all engineering from day one. And that kind of really turned me off because I wanted to, while I thought and assumed that I would go into a real uh, academic field, I also still wanted to have music be a part of my life. And so that was partly why I chose Stetson. And then once I was there and like I said, started taking music classes, um, I just, number one, didn't realize how much I would enjoy actually studying music from like a classical and academic perspective. But number two, realized that there was this way of looking at music beyond a hobby, but it was also still fun. And I feel like I really learned a lot about being a professional within music from my guitar instructor um, at Stetson, and he really taught me a lot about what it meant to be a musician, but also be a professional, and just the way that you practice and the way that you take things seriously and the way that you set your daily schedule. And it's not just, oh, well, every now and then I pick up my guitar when I feel like playing, but it's like, no, you actually have scheduled practice time, and like, this is how you get better, and this is how you um, treat it like a career, to where you can actually make money off of it, and actually go somewhere with it. And so that kind of started opening my eyes to possibilities. And then studying music in college was a lot different than really the musical career that I wanted to pursue. And so that was also kind of a process starting to understand that. And by my junior year of college, I kind of understood that. And we had started a band that was an acoustic duo our freshman year. And then by junior year, we had gotten like one really decent quality. I would like to say good, but it was really just decent um, quality record recorded. And we had started to gain a little bit of popularity online using some social media networking. And at that point, I felt like we had enough there to take a leap of faith, jump, whatever you want to call it, to try and make a career work off of being, you know, pop music, or what, or indie singer songwriter, whatever you want to call our genre, but basically not just the classical music that I was studying in school. Um, and it's a much less defined career path, because it's kind of just, well, how big is your fan base, and how do you grow your fan base, and what songs are you writing, versus like, hey, I have this classical music degree, and I can, you know, apply for a job to teach classical music at a high school or a college or something like that. So it's a lot less defined, but we were young enough and dumb enough to think that it was possible. And so we dropped out of school, and luckily our parents weren't like that angry with us, and kind of went from there. And I think, with me, it was, back to your initial question. So this is like a huge ramble just to answer the question of,
It's
how it
all
went
good.
from career to music. But really, it kind of, what I realized was that I could always go back to school. And I had kind of this brief moment in time for this opportunity, um, where something organic was happening with our music that I felt like we could go somewhere with it. And if it didn't work out, I could go back to school. And then I also kind of liked the potential security of knowing that if I did go back to school, I probably would go back into a more academic field, and not necessarily be doing music and some of the other stuff, but it would be more specified of like, hey, I tried music the way I wanted to do it, it didn't work out, now I'm going back for a real job, so to speak. And if I never went back, then great.
If you never went back, then it meant that the first step was a success, right?
Right, exactly.
So, and your little ramble gave me so much food for conversation or further questions. One of them, you talked about your guitar teacher or instructor in college.
Hmm.
Was he a mentor to help you kind of get to the point where, or to go from this isn't going to work to maybe it is possible that I can have a career in music?
I think so. I don't know, I don't think it was like a formal, oh, he's my mentor or anything
Oh,
like
it's
that, but
never formal. Well,
yeah,
it could,
no,
but it doesn't
but
have
it
to be.
was, he was just the guitar instructor. I mean, our guitar program at the school is really small. We had, you know, anywhere from 10 to 15 guitar majors at any time during the semesters that I was there. And so he was just the one that ran everything, and he was a phenomenal classical guitarist himself, and was a great instructor and all that. But I feel like he just went kind of and not necessarily with any intention, but just because of who he was as a person. I think that he was just very relatable, and really able to um, just teach you more than just guitar. And so I think he just did that naturally. And I think some people maybe wouldn't have meant as much to them, or they maybe wouldn't have picked up on it as much, because they didn't necessarily need it or want anything more than just to learn guitar. But I think for me and just the type of person I am and where I was in life at the time, it did mean a lot to me. Um, and so I, a lot of those little, a lot of it was just comments that he would make almost in passing, or things that he would talk about. Well, early in my career, this is something that I did. And what, like, so I guess the best example is, when I changed my major from chemistry to guitar, I had a quick conversation with him about it. And said something along the lines of, oh, well, I've got all these chemistry credits, so I'll probably keep chemistry as a minor, and then I'll have a backup plan if I need it or something. And he started laughing. He said, yeah, I remember when I, first went into music as a career, and a lot of people told me to have a backup plan, and I just told them all to go to hell. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, it's like music is just so competitive, and, so many people want to be in this field. And if you have a backup plan, within 2 or 3 or 4 years, you'll just end up going with your backup plan. And if you really want to be successful in music, you just have to be committed to be successful in music. And, that really stuck out to me. That was like, oh, wow. Like, okay. And I guess it's a mindset, I mean, really, it's a competitive industry, like you said. And I mean, just like professional sports or something, I mean, it's a lot of people want to do it, but not everybody can. And it's not that they necessarily don't have the ability, but that mindset is also very important. And that was just one of those moments. There was a huge teaching moment for me from him.
I think the mindset, just like a lot of things, mindset is 98%, if
Yeah.
not 100.
Right.
And I know that that little blurb is going to be Tony's favorite part of this whole thing, because as a 19-year-old, he wants to go into music, and he's like, there is no backup plan, mom.
Right. Right.
And I'm like, all right.
Right. Well, there's that very fine line between, dumb and reckless, and passion, and success, and, and I think that there's a lot of, for most very successful people, we only see in their public life is only when they hit the top of the mountain, but we don't see that whole
Don't
climb
see the
upward.
work and
Yeah.
the dedication and the struggle
Right.
and the small wins and the one step forward, three back.
Right. Right.
But all of those steps make us who we are.
Right.
And one of the things that we always talk about in our house is, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Okay.
And I think your professor's comment about no backup plan, or I remember this, when we find people that give us those nuggets,
Mm-hmm.
it's because they're parked in our path when they're supposed to be there
Right.
to help
Absolutely.
move us to someplace else.
Absolutely.
So do you and your brother have a manager for your band? And if so, when did you find one? Or what have you done to manage your careers?
Yeah, great question. We don't have one currently. We have in the past, and I think that what we realized when we had one, was a couple things. Number one, we probably weren't as big as we thought we were, and didn't necessarily need one. um, and number two, we also realized that you're always going to work the hardest for yourself, right? And your dreams are the most real to you, not necessarily to other people. And what we found was, and it wasn't necessarily that our manager wasn't doing a good job, as much as he was kind of we were a baby band at the time, and he was a baby manager at the time. And so it was kind of us all learning together. He was learning how to manage a band. He was really wanting to get into, artist management. And we were starting to get to the point where we were like, maybe this would be a helpful thing, because we're drowning a little bit in some of the day-to-day stuff. And what we found was that it actually, in a way, kind of just slowed us down, because we just had one more person that we had to loop in to every conversation, and for every decision that we had to make, we were running it by someone else. And if he just wasn't picking up his phone that day, or wasn't responding fast enough, it would just cost us time. And even then there would be other times where he would say, oh, well, I think I can get you on, you know, 2 weeks of this tour with these 3 bands. So block these dates off, and then we'd block them off. And then we'd be waiting to hear back, waiting to hear back, waiting to hear back, and nothing would come of it. And then we get annoyed that we've got now 2 weeks at home sitting on a couch instead of being out on the road making money, that we could have booked something during that time. And so, you know, maybe part of it was he, you know, like I said, he was a baby manager. He didn't really have a ton of connections at the time, which was part of the appeal to us. Was we thought that that could be a good fit, that we would kind of grow together. And, you know, he wasn't necessarily going to charge us right away until we all kind of grew into our roles. Um, but part of the downside of that was he didn't have a ton of connections. So I think while he had a lot of ideas and promise of potential, there wasn't a whole lot of results. And so we kind of moved on from that. And then there was another stage in our career where we ended up working pretty hands-on with a music attorney that was a little more active than just a typical music attorney of just, you know, send me contracts and agreements when you have them and I'll review them. And he was a little more active on, hey, I have all these connections because I've done deals with Warner Republic and Island and Def Jam and, you know, all these different labels and different managers and stuff. So he really liked the personal aspect of the job and not just the paperwork aspect of it. So he took on a little more active role in like actually pitching bands and helping facilitate some of the deals, as opposed to just doing the paperwork on the back end of the deals. So we worked with him a little bit, I want to say for maybe a year or two, and we still have a really good relationship with him, but kind of let him pitch us around a little bit, with some mixed results. And then once we kind of did the cycle with him and didn't really get anything to stick, then we kind of mutually parted ways, because it didn't really make sense to keep paying him for his time or for him to keep wasting his time when he'd already kind of sent us to his contacts, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, and then outside of that, we've just felt like for the most part, it was something that we could handle. I mean, I guess what we realized from those two experiences was that unless we had somebody that had way bigger connections than what we had, if it was just because we were too lazy to, you know, update our website or something like that, you know, it's like we could just do that ourselves, or, you know, order new merchandise or something. You know, it's like we could figure that out. You know, we can, you know, once, if we were treating this like a full-time job like we should be, you know, we don't need to be paying someone else to do those little daily activities, if that makes sense. So
It
that's
does.
kind of where we've ended up with management. um, there are specific nuances of the music industry where we have a college booking agent, that specifically facilitates anything that we do in the college market. So that kind of takes that side of it. Um, and there's other things that, like we've had other booking agents at times. So again, it's not like a manager, but it is outsourcing some specific activities to other people. And so that's kind of what we've settled into, like what works best for us is just outsourcing certain things of people that have connections and in specific niches that work really well. But then just the day in and day out of keeping the business of the band afloat, we just do ourselves.
Well, it's kind of, I talk about that being leverage. How do
Hmm.
you leverage yourself?
Yeah.
You can outsource and hire people to do the things that they do best and
Right.
take it off of your plate and park it onto theirs, because they are better equipped to do it than you are, because
Right.
that's what they do. And that frees you up to do what you do. And
Right.
that just makes good business sense.
Yes.
So have either of you or Ty, like taken any business courses or done any reading, studying on running a business and operating your band as a business?
Not formally. I think we've both, as we've gotten older, done more in our own personal lives as we've kind of started to figure out, like, hey, you know, we're about to be 30. Like, what do we, you know, how are we got to retire at some point, or, you know, what does retirement look like, or what is it, you know, it's like you take just a little bit of a more business like approach to your life in general. And so, you know, with different things like investing, or, you know, I've kind of gotten a little bit into real estate investing and things like that. And so that I think even more so than the band stuff has taken both of us into little like business worlds. And there's so many good resources on, free resources online with podcasts and books and things like that, to where I think we've each gotten a little bit of business knowledge in those ways. And then we've been able to take that and turn around and apply it back into the band. But we've never really done like any formal business training or really thought formally about how do we treat the band as a business. I think it's just kind of something we've always done and kind of learned to grow. Well, now in saying that, Ty still wakes up at noon every day and, stays up until, God knows what hour. And, I don't know. His life is far more glamorous as a musician than mine is. I'll say that.
Well, let me see. I'm pretty sure you told me before we started that may have something to do with the fact that he has no kids and you have kids.
That's a big part of it.
Once you become a parent, all of a sudden we kind of lose our identity and ultimate control of our life, because our lives are now run by little people.
Exactly.
Smaller versions of ourselves.
Yes.
So how old are your kids?
Yes. So I've got two kids. They're 3.5 and 1.5. The oldest is Holden. He's a boy, 3.5. And then Arden is my little sweet angel girl, and she's about 1.5. And then we've got one more on the way. So.
And then the fun begins.
Yeah.
So 3.5 and 1.5. And when is baby number 3 due?
In December. So yeah, we're about halfway there.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Our first 3 were 3 within 3 years and a few days.
Okay.
So I can relate to your, ours were 18 months, 18 months, and then 30 months. So
yeah,
it's a whole new world once you run out of enough hands to have one in each.
Yeah. See, I don't like you telling me that, because I was of the mindset that going from 0 to 1 would be the hardest, and then 1 to 2 would be a little less hard, and then 2 to 3 would be a little less hard. But you're telling me 2 to 3 is like a whole nother challenge.
0 to 1 was the hardest.
Okay.
Because you had, well, speaking from my personal experience, I had no idea what I was in for.
Right.
And the amount of sleep deprivation that went with it.
Yes.
And how demanding they can be. And of course, my oldest, and he hasn't changed much in 19 years. And then 1 to 2, it was a challenge just because it was no longer a one-on-one.
Right.
2 to 3, especially when they're 3 years between number 1 and number 3.
Right.
We had 3 in diapers all at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And I think the easiest transition for us was 3 to 4.
Okay.
Because we were already outnumbered.
Right.
And we knew how to deal with being outnumbered.
Right. Your mindset had already been committed to chaos. You were already like, our world is chaos.
It's gone.
That's it. Yeah.
Well,
so, it's like we have, I'm embarrassed to say this, but we have an old, dirty, ratty mattress in the middle of our living room that just stays there all the time. So my kids can just do gymnastics in the middle of the house whenever they want. So that's how committed to the chaos we are.
I was going to say, you say that like it's a bad thing.
It's a great thing.
I think that's an awesome thing.
You have to explain why you have an old mattress in the middle of your living room.
Yeah, but I'm guessing around the mattress is probably kids stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Because if you're cool enough parents to have a mattress in the middle of the living room, that also tells me that you aren't OCD about making sure that all their toys are picked up and put where they belong.
No. Well, our system is we try and keep the main common areas clean, at least at the end of the day, like get all the toys out. But then the kids' room is just a giant storage unit of toys is what that is.
That might be changing.
Yeah, we'll see. You're scaring me.
Nah, it's all good. And especially if, we have all boys, but the boys have all been good about welcoming the next one into the tribe.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And I'm not, are Holden and Arden close? Are they good friends?
They are. Yeah. And luckily she is very tough because it took a little while for him to learn how to be gentle with the baby and with New, and he's definitely a little bit of a rough and tumble kid. But now she's kind of turned into that as well, but she keeps up with him really well. And now that she's 1.5 and can really run around with him and interact, it's now is where it's really fun because they'll go, he'll ask her, he'll be like, do you want to come in my room with me, and they'll play and all that stuff. And you don't have to be quite so afraid that he's gonna kill her or something, because she's not so little and fragile.
Well, even when they're little and we think that they're fragile, they are way tougher than we ever give them
Yes,
credit for.
that's true.
And our third, he didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to learn how to crawl or walk or talk. Because we would park him on the floor and the two older ones would come wherever he was.
Right. Okay.
And he would try to talk, and my husband and I would try to figure out what he was trying to say.
Uh-huh.
And the other two would be like, Mom, this is what he wants.
Right.
So he didn't have to talk either.
Oh man.
So if your two older ones are good little buddies and they're good helpers, don't be surprised if number 3 really doesn't have to do anything.
Okay.
Because they're going to do it for him or
Gotcha.
her.
That would be fun.
And of course, having boys, they're all rough and tumble. So
Yes.
I don't know what it's like having girls, because
Yeah.
the only one in our house is me.
Yeah. Well, it's been fun having one of each. So we'll see. The third one will be the tiebreaker. So we'll see if we end up being a girl house primarily or a boy house primarily.
Well, how many siblings do you have? I know you have one brother.
I have actually 3 brothers and 5 sisters.
So 9. So you come from chaos.
Yes.
Where do you and Ty fall in the lineup?
We're number 2 and 3. So we have one older sister, then the 2 of us as twins, and then everybody else.
So you guys are on the top of the food chain.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Sort of, yeah. Well, I was kind of always on the bottom because Ty was bigger than me growing up. So.
And is he older?
Yes, he was born first. Yeah.
By how much?
My parents say 10 minutes, but I think that's kind of like my dad's lazy way of not remembering and just being like, about 10 minutes,
And I have friends who are twins, and the one will make sure to point out that he is older by 2 minutes.
Oh, okay. Very specific.
So yes, incredibly, because he's the big brother.
Yeah.
And I think they're out of a family of 7.
Okay.
But they're the babies. So the older one didn't want to be the baby.
Right. That's funny.
So I get it. I understand that there is a entertaining story about you proposing to Kelsey.
Oh man, how'd you find that out?
My son told me, and in fact, he wrote a note. Ask him about the proposal.
Oh my gosh. Did I tell him this, or did he just find it? Google
I
my
think
name over the internet.
I'm not sure if
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah, so this is pretty crazy. I'm not very good at planning sometimes, but I was trying to plan this well, but because I'm not an experienced planner, it didn't really, I don't know. Anyway, so I had this great idea. My wife had just accepted her first job up in Brooklyn, New York, and we'd been dating for 4-ish years. We started dating early college, so it was kind of, it was the right time. I wanted to propose, and so I was going up to help her move into her first apartment, and thought, I'll propose while we're in New York together. I had gone up with her and visited when she was applying for jobs, and we just really loved a lot of New York. And our favorite thing that we did the whole time we were there was we'd walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, and you just have this great view of lower Manhattan on one side and Brooklyn on the other side, and the bridge itself is just such an iconic piece of architecture and history and construction and all that. And so I had the ring, and I knew that she had no clue that I was gonna propose, because she was actually kind of mad at me. I know I could tell she never told me this, but I could tell that she was mad at me that I hadn't proposed like before she moved, because she was like thinking, I think she was starting to feel a little insecure that she was moving and we weren't engaged, and like what was gonna happen and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so I wanted it to be a surprise, so I had the ring, and of course they give it to you in this like giant jewelry box, the size of like a, you know, piece of toilet paper or something, like a roll of toilet paper. I mean, just gigantic. And being a musician, I wear these super tight emo jeans that nobody should ever wear, but I don't know, I just do. And so there was no way that I could put this ring box in my pockets without her seeing this giant lump in my pockets and asking questions, and I'm a terrible liar on top of that. And so I knew she'd get it out of me. So our plan was to walk to have dinner in Manhattan, and we were going to walk over the Brooklyn Bridge, because her apartment that she was getting was pretty close to the base of the Brooklyn Bridge on the Brooklyn side. So we are going to walk over to Manhattan, and when we were going to get halfway across at one of the lookout spots, I was going to drop down and propose and all that stuff. Well, first I screwed it up because we started walking up the bridge, and she was in a hurry because we were like potentially running a little bit late for our dinner reservation, which we weren't, but she's always in a hurry. And then I was like super nervous, and I just remember I ended up like, there's basically two lookout spots at the Brooklyn Bridge, and I didn't realize that at the time. I thought there was only one. So I kind of missed the first one, because she was like, I kept on waiting for her to turn around and not be looking before I went and grabbed the ring. And then, but she never stopped kind of being closer. Like I couldn't let her, like, I kept on trying to get her to look at the scenery, and she wouldn't.
He
She
was on
kept
a
kind of dragging me
mission.
further. Yeah, she was on a mission. So then we got like halfway, a little bit further past that, and I was like, okay, well now, I'm gonna ruin the moment. So then I just, you know, pulled the old like, oh, I have to tie my shoe, like I'll catch up with you trick or something stupid like that. And then I started to get the ring out of my pocket, and it kind of got stuck as I was getting it out, and it just like flipped right out of my hand in my pocket. And on the walkway of the Brooklyn Bridge, it's not completely sealed. It's just wooden slats, like, a dock or something. And so there's plenty of room for a little ring to just go right through. So of course that's what happened. It just goes ting, 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 boom, and just fell right through the walkway, and so I'm just like mortified. She turns around, she heard something, and so she turns around to see me like on all fours, staring at the bottom of the walkway, and asks me, did you drop something, what happened, and I'm like, ghost, she said my face was ghost white. And I think I had some clever pickup line of like, I just dropped our engagement ring off the Brooklyn Bridge, will you marry me, or something. And she thought I was joking, and then it was like, the more she thought about the look on my face, realized that I definitely wasn't joking. And then then we had this like awful moment of, are we excited, should we be celebrating, are we just like devastated, are we actually engaged, are we not engaged? Like, did I actually ask the question, are you saying yes? And it was really confusing. And then we started, you know just kind of going into panic mode. And then, long story short, I know I've already made it long, but what ended up happening is they were doing a big, massive construction project on the bridge. And so they had a bunch of shielding underneath the bridge, luckily, right at the place that I had stopped to try and pull off this proposal. And so the ring had landed on one of these construction platforms, which we didn't know if that was the case or not. And we had no idea how to potentially get down there to look, but we basically spent the next 48 hours calling, emailing any number or anything that we could find online. First, I think we spent that entire night, I think we were out till like midnight trying to find somebody. Of course, there were no construction workers actually working at the time.
Of
So
course.
we were walking up, pacing up and down the bridge for 5 hours trying to find somebody that could potentially, go look for us or whatever. And then finally gave up that night, ended up making a bunch of phone calls, emails, everything else. And I think that ultimately I ended up emailing like information at brooklynbridgeconstruction.gov or something like that, and got a response literally within an hour of sending an email to that address that was like, oh, hey, I can't even remember the woman's name now, but she was basically exactly the person that we need to get a hold of somehow. It was like, oh, I'll send somebody to look down there tomorrow. And within, I think I had then, sorry, I'm all over the place now. It's probably been it's been 11, 12 years since this happened, and now it's probably been 8 years since I've had to tell this
Oh,
story because it's just
sorry.
horrible. No, it's okay. It's like my worst nightmare, but um
Yeah, but it's also a huge miracle, I believe.
yeah, it is. So anyways, they ended up finding the ring, and I had gone, at this point we were doing a recording project in Indiana, so I had then, as a total just awful move, screwed up our engagement, then left the next day to go to Indiana to record. And then, my poor now fiance was, going through all this stress, trying to move in, trying to start a new job, whatever. So I remember getting a call from her 2 days later at like 7 o'clock in the morning or something. And they'd already found the ring that morning. They had gone down first thing that morning and found it. And, she was all excited. And so somewhere, I think that what happened to make it, this, why it ended up becoming kind of a big news story, is that one of our strategies to potentially get the ring back was to try and alert like a newspaper that it had happened, to see if that could like create some traction to make them go look for it or whatever. And so I think it had been my mom or something had emailed one of the local Brooklyn papers, like the Brooklyn Post or something. And so they had then once the ring was found, then they definitely wanted to do a story on it, and then it started getting picked up. And then the Brooklyn Bridge construction project put their media person on it, because they're like, oh, this is great press for the construction. Everyone's always complaining about the noise and the racket and the construction, and like, this is great press that like our construction project just saved this
Saved a
poor
ring.
idiot's ring. And and then my brother, oh, this is another thing I forgot about. Up to that point, my brother and I basically didn't pay ourselves out of the band because it was just the two of us. And so we basically just shared the band bank account. And if one of us needed money, we just said like, hey, I need money for this. And, so the other one would also take the same amount of money out. And, it was like, that was how we kept it fair. And so the way that I paid for the ring was I just took the money out of the band bank account, which was like almost everything that we had at the time. And,
Oops.
yeah. And I basically told my brother, Ty, when you get married, like we'll pay, we'll give you the same amount of money for a ring. And so, I had to call him that night and be like, hey, that the money, every penny that we have, that I drained out of the band bank account is gone now, cause I just dropped it off the
It's in the
bridge.
river.
Yeah. And anyway, so he was excited that they found it. And so what ended up happening is I ended up flying back to New York because the CBS early show had picked it up to do a segment on it. So they wanted my fiance and I to come on and meet with the construction worker that found it, and like have this little reunion meeting and talk about it all and whatever. So it was like this whirlwind of 4 or 5 days when I was supposed to just be recording an album in Indiana, and instead I was, flying in and out of New York and, you know, crying and laughing and everything. I don't know. It was a mess, but one of the best and worst days of my life, I guess.
All right. So let's kind of talk about how that may have helped your career. That's a lot of publicity, being on, one of the main network morning shows. And you guys already had your band.
Yes.
You were recording an album. Were you recording your first album, or?
No, it was our third at the time.
So a little publicity on a morning show, even if it was based upon you wearing super tight jeans and your engagement ring kind of flinging out of them as you were trying to get it and be cool. How did that help your band? Once your
Unfortunately, not
fiance
really
got
much. Yeah, I tried to, you know, I was trying to toe that line of like, hey, give me a shout out, but but also just, doing as I was told, kind of thing. So I should have, in hindsight, I kind of choked up in the moment. I should have said the band name or something while we were on air. At the time, I don't think I ended up saying a whole lot. I just kind of sat there, and I think they mostly talked to my wife and the construction worker, because those were the two perspectives they were more interested in, I guess. And I was just kind of the dude that messed up on the side. But I don't know. Yeah, I think I don't think it really added much. I mean, I'm sure that I know that the next year or so when we went on tour, I think that we had a lot of fans that came up and were like, "Oh, we saw, my mom loves your guys' music now because, I made her watch you guys on TV, or like she saw you on the TV and I told her that I knew your band and whatever." But I don't think that we necessarily had a ton of new fans come out of it, so to speak, if that makes sense. But
Sure.
yeah, I kind of
So
screwed that up, I guess.
it's one of those, no matter what you do, you can walk away and say, I wish I would have said this. Why
Sure.
didn't I say that?
I think that whole weekend is full of regret for me, which is why the story is really fun for everyone else, and with me, it just everything that happened. I kind of, other than the fact that I ended up engaged to my wife, everything else was regretful.
Oh, I don't know. I think there are other ways to look at it. First
Sure,
off,
probably.
it's a great story.
Yeah.
Secondly, just imagine the miracle that this ring fell through the slats on the Brooklyn Bridge and it ended up on a construction site before it hit the river.
Yes.
And then that somebody actually found this
Yeah.
ring and returned it.
Yes. Yeah.
And
I mean,
she
there was
married you anyway.
yeah, it was definitely a miracle, and we would never look past that. And even when one of the cool moments when we talked to the construction worker that found it was he told us how easy it was to find. He was like, it was sitting up almost like it was just like presenting
Waiting.
itself, waiting. So it really felt like a meant to be type of situation in a lot of ways, which is neat to experience.
To me, that story kind of gives me a little hope in humanity when you think about New York. My impression, being in central Wisconsin,
Sure.
is you could die on the streets and people are just going to walk right over you. They don't care because there are
Yeah.
just so many people.
Right.
So it's a
Yeah.
good human interest story.
Yes. Absolutely.
And Tony mentioned, and I know he's planning on coming down and recording with you,
Hmm.
that in addition to your band, you actually created a studio, a recording studio.
Yep.
Is it in your home
So
or
it actually was pre-kids. I just wanted the extra bedrooms. It was my studio room, and it was great, and it was me and my dog all day every day making music, and that was it. And then the kids came, messed everything up. But
they do that?
yeah, they do. But no, um I kind of knew once we had kids that our house is not that big, and all the bedrooms are clustered in one little grouping together, and so I wasn't really going to be able to record the way that I wanted to, or the times that I wanted to, if we were having to deal with a sleeping child or any of that stuff. And excuse me. So once my wife got pregnant, I started looking into some other alternatives and ended up finding this awesome little setup that we have here. So I basically just have this old converted garage now that has become my recording studio. So I've got two rooms, a little kitchenette, a bathroom. And so there's my tracking room with my desk right here where I'm sitting. And there's a couch behind me when I don't have my vocal panel up, but I end up recording myself a lot. So I have all my vocal stuff at my desk. And then when I'm recording other people, it's in the other room over there, which is like our tracking room, our live room that is all treated and um, has just a bunch of guitars and instruments and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the production side, again, I guess maybe going back to me being a little nerdy, um, music production is really fun. And obviously part of it is making and creating music, but there's also a lot of technical parts to it and a lot of boring or nerdy parts of it. And a lot of it is, on the computer and just learning the programs. And I was always into that kind of stuff, and I always was a little bit of a control freak. Anytime we would go and record with other people, I was always watching to see what they were doing, make sure they weren't messing up our music, and feeling like I could probably do it better if I just knew what I was doing a little bit more and stuff. And So I kind of was always trying to learn that myself and just picking up tips and tricks from other producers that we worked with along the way. To where I think in 2014 we released an EP, which was our first one that I recorded and produced fully myself. So I played every instrument, et cetera, et cetera. And I actually mixed and mastered that one myself, and then kind of figured out through that process that that was one of my weaknesses, was that I was definitely better at the front end production side, whereas the mixing and mastering part was definitely something that I could outsource um, to people that were a little bit better, because that's kind of a different, it kind of gets into a different world that's even more technical, I'd say, than the production side of things. And um, I can go a lot more in detail on that if you want, but I'll leave it there for now.
All right. You said you recorded, you played all of the instruments. How many instruments do you play?
um it's hard to say exactly. I mean, it's kind of like learning a new language. When you meet people that know like 10 or 12 languages, there starts to be a lot of crossover.
Mhm.
And so they might not know German, but there's so much crossover between French and Spanish and Latin, or whatever else, that they could like kind of get by in German or pick it up really quickly. And that's kind of how music is to me. So it's like I'm really well versed mainly in piano and guitar are my two main instruments. And then I've done a little bit with drums and like bass and stuff. But I've played enough guitar that pretty much anything with strings or strumming now I can dabble and make sense of it. So whether that's mandolin or a banjo or even a violin, we grew up playing a little bit of violin when I was really little. So I can do that. And now the nice thing with music technology and recording is any instrument that you can think of, they make a software instrument for it. So you can basically play it on a keyboard and then it comes out as whatever instrument you want it to be. And so I've gotten really good at that. I can play a lot of different instruments just on my little MIDI keyboard. So yeah, that not a specific answer, but that's kind of how it is.
That's okay. I have a music background too, and like woodwinds, as long as you know the fingering,
Right.
you can play any instrument.
Right.
So I
Yep.
played the flute, the bassoon, the alto, and the tenor sax.
Yes,
And I could
exactly.
also play the oboe and the clarinet because they all had the same fingering. It was just a matter of the embouchure for whatever
Yes.
reed you were working with.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, the skill set transfers over. So
But the fact that you have a keyboard that can make it sound like any instrument,
it's kind of like cheating, but
I, that was the word I was coming up with, is kind of a
what
cheater. Oh.
well, what's funny is that I fought it for a little while, and what I kind of realized was I was really just holding myself back, because what I was actually doing was I was making my job harder for myself. And instead of using it as, hey, here's this immensely creative tool, I was kind of stuck on this idea of, oh, it's not real music, or I'm not playing a real instrument, instead of looking at it as just a tool for creativity. And um there's so many sounds now in music where they sound awesome, and they're not even necessarily, you can barely even tell what instrument they're, it's like all the lines have been blurred.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of electric guitar parts that kind of sound like synthesizer parts, and vice versa. And now there's so much with vocal manipulation, and um, a lot of that is people chop up different vocal lines and they put them all into a sampler pad, and then they play different vocal parts on a keyboard. So you're playing different words and notes, and you're making this like really cool sounding vocal melody by playing the keyboard, but you're coming up with stuff that you would never come up with if you were actually singing, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So now what I've realized is to, instead of look at it as cheating, is to look at it as a creative tool to create something unique and cool. And that really, ultimately, that's what music is. At some level, back in human history, you know they thought the same thing about guitars and plucking guitars versus having a bowed string instrument. And I remember learning this when I was studying classical music, is that now it's formally taught that you play classical guitar with long fingernails. Well, at one point in time, before people started doing that, it was like um people would complain if you had a tone like a fingernail tone because they was like clicky or but what they eventually realized was that they made some tweaks to the instrument to where you could still get a nice warm tone out of it, and if you polished them up and smooth them out the right way, you could get a really warm tone, but you had a lot more power and a lot more brightness and a lot more clarity to the notes if you were playing with your nails versus just the flesh of your finger, so to speak. And so they realized you had two different ways of creating different tones on the guitar. So it actually became a much more expressive instrument as opposed to, cheating by, oh, you're getting extra power by using your fingernails or whatever, and so I don't know. I mean, we've always, music is always evolving, just like so many other things in life. And if you're, in some ways, yes, it's nice to look back and, stay committed to some of the roots, and, you definitely don't want to like pretend like musical theory doesn't exist or something like that. But at the same point in time, if you're way too committed to that and you're never evolving and progressing with it, then you're kind of just getting left behind.
That's very interesting. But it's all about perspective,
Yes.
and it's all about how you look at things. And I love your analogy, like with the nails for the guitar. And it takes me back to when I was in high school, and my piano teacher, her nails were so short because she was a concert pianist.
Yes.
And you don't want any clicking.
Yes.
And I would sit at the piano, and there were days where she made me file my nails at the beginning of my lesson because they were too long.
Yep.
But it really does change the tone and the feel, just in how you're doing something.
Yep.
And nothing would change if nobody challenged the boundaries.
Exactly.
So I think about, I went from cheating to this just allows me to be more creative.
Right.
And once you open that door, and then you talked about there are sounds where you can't tell what instrument it is because it's like a number of instruments pulled together to make an entirely new and different sound.
Right.
That adds all of the pluses from them into one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's even a recording technique, called stacking or layering, where you basically play the same part or the same melody, and then you just play it with 5 or 6 different instruments. And, it's like, you don't even have to play it 5 or 6 different times. You can literally just make a new instrument track on your program, your recording program, and then just copy down the MIDI file and it's already playing. It's like the old me would have been like, oh man, that's cheating. Like, that's so dumb. Like, you're not even playing the part again. But the reality is like, no, I just worked way faster and now like you only have so much creative energy. That's another thing that I've learned. And so the more efficient that you can be, the more you allow, the more you save your creative energy, and then you can use that on something bigger or something.
Absolutely. So let me ask you a question, kind of going back to my book of being happy in both worlds and how you can have a successful career and a happy family.
Yes.
As a professional musician who would be out touring and recording, once Holden made the scene and then Arden made the scene, how did you and your wife, and then even you and your brother, because you and your brother are the band, you and your wife are the home team.
Right.
How did you guys juggle it to make it work?
Yes, great question. And it's definitely an ongoing struggle.
It is a struggle.
But I mean, I've kind of from day one, even before kids, always had the perspective of, my family is priority number one. And, music is a passion and a career, but, no matter what career I went into, that would have been my perspective. And that was just a choice that I made very early on in life of that's how I wanted my life to go. And not everybody has to make that choice. I mean, there's definitely a lot of people that have prioritized career over everything else, including family. And a lot of them are very successful in their career, but they've sacrificed probably family relationships and some other things along the way. Now that might make them happy and that's fine, but that wasn't the way that I wanted to do it. So even when I got married, we scaled back on some of the amount of the volume of touring that we were doing. And then when we had kids, it kind of just went even to another lower level. So it kind of just became one of those things where, hey, we used to be willing to travel maybe for this amount of money. Well, now we're only going to travel for this amount of money, or something, and just, we used to be willing to be gone for 4 weeks at a time. Now we're never going to be gone for more than 10 days at a time, or, something like that. Um, and then it also just takes a lot more planning and structure of, okay, we've got this opportunity to go out and play, these 8 shows over the course of 2 weeks. We'll make this much money. Obviously, my brother's like, yeah, take it, take it, take, but it's like, I've got to sit down, with my wife and say like, hey, this is how much we're going to make, what's our childcare situation look like, let's organize that, and she works too. And that's partly to, her career is important to her, and she's made certain sacrifices there too. Like, she went from working full time to now she works part time, with now that we have kids, and so that helps kind of balance out to allow me to still get time to do my stuff that I'm trying to do. And so really it's just a balancing act, juggling act, whatever you want to call it, but it's just constant communication and constant working through the tension of, here's the opportunity, here's how much money we can make, and then here's how long we'll be gone, here's the amount of time, stress, everything else that it'll put on the family side of things. Is it worth doing? Yes or no, go, kind of thing. And so that's kind of been it. So I don't know
That
if you
did
have
answer
any thoughts,
the question.
from there. I can elaborate a little more, but if
No,
that's
and it's really cool that um you guys can work to that point. Do you think that your ability to do that analysis, and that I look at it as a cost benefit analysis,
sure.
and
Right.
the cost isn't just monetary, it's
Right.
all of the other stuff.
Right.
And the fact that Ty doesn't have kids at this point, so he doesn't necessarily understand that pull or that component.
Right.
Do you ever sit back and think how fortunate you are that you're basically in business in the Icarus account with your brother, and not just a brother, but your twin brother, that you're kind of like this?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And he's sacrificed a lot, to allow me to have the family life that I want to have.
Absolutely.
Um, and he brings that up all the time for sure. But, but,
Okay,
that's something,
roll that over your head, but
yeah,
okay.
yeah. But, but the nice thing is, I think I've been pretty upfront about the way that I wanted my family life to go. And, we've also tried to, we understand there's push and pull on both sides. And, we've tried to navigate that as cleanly as possible. And sometimes, he does get mad at me because there's some shows that he wants to take that we don't end up taking, whatever, we deal with that when that happens. And then I try and do my best to, when I know that it's something that, hey, this is a really good opportunity, either publicity wise or career wise or financial or whatever, making sure that my wife knows like, hey, this is one that we really need to find a way to make it work. So it goes both ways there. As we've gotten further down this path, especially with kids, I mean, that's been a little more recent, in the last 3.5 years. Um, I've started being a little more upfront with some of our clients or buyers or venues, whatever you want to call it, where I'll let them know if I know that's going to be a hard date for me to do because of family stuff. I'll kind of let them know early on, like, hey, there's a potential that I can't do this. Would you be interested in having Ty come play solo, or Ty we've got a couple other music friends that could, maybe one of them could come with Ty and do, they would still, so it'd still feel like an acoustic duo. It just wouldn't be me and Ty. It would be Ty and someone else. But, he's still playing Icarus Account songs, et cetera, et cetera. And then ironically, we've actually had a couple times where I've done that and gone and played a show without Ty when he was on his honeymoon and some other stuff. So, we've learned to navigate that a little bit. And part of that is just communicating really well with our clients, and making sure that they would be on board with that. And moving forward, I think we're both gonna potentially release some solo music projects that would then help to open those avenues up as well, to where, because that's what we're realizing, is that as we come into adulthood, we're both going to have family situations that pull us in a lot of different directions, and it's way more complicated than just I'm married, you're married, but we're still brothers, we're still in a band together. It gets a lot more complicated. And so to kind of allow us to each have the commitment level to the Icarus account that we have, but then also allow each of us avenues individually to be able to still pursue musical endeavors without the other one, I think is going to be a key moving forward, just so that we don't have that bitterness building up that, like, well, you didn't let me do this show, and like I didn't make this money because you didn't want to go because of your kids or whatever. And that allows us to also, like for Ty to have a healthier relationship as an uncle, with my kids, because he's not mad at my kids for like ruining his career or something like that. And
Sounds like you guys are doing a great job of communicating, but also balancing expectations.
trying. I think it's easier. It sounds better talking about it now than I think it's always executed in
Hindsight,
person.
hindsight is great perspective.
Yes, but
And
this is how we attempt to do it. I don't know if this is always how we executed the plan, but
so I know that you have another commitment,
yes.
and it's been wonderful chatting with you. I have one final question for you.
Okay.
If you could snap your fingers and change one thing in the world today, what would it be? No work required on your end
Mm,
other than snapping your fingers.
man, that's a great question. Um, Without thinking about it too much.
Whatever came to your gut first.
Yeah, well, so the one, for me, it would be clean water. And I think I've tried to, one of the things that's always been important to me in life is giving, and giving back. And just growing up in America in general, is even if you're a poor person in America, you're pretty wealthy by the rest of the world's standards. And I remember learning that, several different times growing up, from different, as my parents or myself did different trips to other countries and things like that. And as I kind of researched that a little bit more, and just the health standards that we have here and the wealth standards that we have here, one of the things that I learned is that there's still so many people in the world that don't have access to clean drinking water. And there's so many really, like, things that we would consider very basic and easily solvable health problems. Um, Other people in the world have those problems simply because they don't have access to clean drinking water. So, my wife and I don't think I've ever talked about this publicly, but one thing that we do in our personal life is, we try to give a certain amount of money every month of what we make, and we specifically give that to an organization called Charity Water. And it started because I read a book. It's called Thirst, I believe. It's been a couple of years since I've read it, so I may have been wrong on the title. I think it's called Thirst. And the guy that started Charity Water wrote the book, and it was just amazing. And I'd already known about the clean water problem before that, but just hearing it from his perspective and getting some more of the numbers, and then his story itself was just super cool. The way that he transitioned from basically being like a nightclub party planner to then starting like the biggest charity organization in the world. And they have, the reason why we donate to them, is because they have a really, um, what's the word I'm looking for? A really transparent giving setup, to where they basically have one set of like donators that help to run the company. So like all the money that it takes to actually run, like staff salaries and all that kind of stuff, is from one set of donors, where they know that, like, hey, this is what I'm paying for, is for this company to be run. And then anyone that actually donates to Charity Water, 100% of that money goes to charity and to building wells.
That's
And
impressive.
right, which is really impressive, because a lot of charities, it's like, when you actually look up the numbers, it's like
It's not
15%
a
of the money
charity.
given is what's actually going to the charity. And so that was something to me that was like really, like, I'd wanted to give for a long time, but I was always nervous about it, because I was like, well, what if I'm just giving to this for this person to you hear all these stories about, these mega church pastors that have these like $20 million compound houses, and
Yep.
you know, all that stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to give to that. You know, it's like I want to give to people that need it. And so I was really impressed by that, and just really, that was comforting to me to know that, like, hey, if I'm giving any money that I'm giving to this is going to clean water projects throughout the world. But it's a problem that we don't really have in America, but it's a major world problem. And that is what I would change if I could change something.
That's awesome.
Give everyone clean water.
Well, sorry, Trey.
If I had $1 for every time that had happened in my life.
Well, you know what? And I do it to my kids all the time, and they don't even start with the same letter. So I certainly appreciate your time. And where could people find you if they want to find you?
Yeah, so for the band, you can just go to theicarusaccount.com. If you're a streaming music person, Apple Music or Spotify, you can just look up the Icarus Account. So that's the space new word Icarus, Icarus, and then another new word account, ACCOUNT. You can follow me on Instagram. It's at Trey Turner Band. That's TREYTURNERBAND, like a rock band. Unfortunately, that'll soon be changing. Actually, it'll soon be Trevor Madison Music. My solo project is going to be based around my full name with my middle name. It'll be Trevor Madison. So I don't know how quickly you release these podcasts, but I'll actually be announcing that in the next month probably. So at Trevor Madison Music will be the new social media handle that I'm using on Instagram and all that stuff, and you'll be able to find me there.
So this will probably be out before you do that, or it
Okay.
depends on how quickly Tony gets it turned around.
Okay, sounds good.
So I'm Sarah Ruffi. If you enjoyed what you heard today, click subscribe or check out You and Your Life, and have a great life and live it on your terms. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Trey.
Yep, thanks, Sarah.